We are picking up on our classes regarding gender essentialism and LGBTQIA erasure in tarot readings and other forms of divination. What we actually started the class with was going over the issues with gender essentialism. So last time we covered how biological essentialism is basically bullshit, and that there is no natural gender binary that is created without human intervention, and the dangers of having these really strict roles for men and women, starting with sort of the trans and intersex erasure, the gender fluid, non-gendered, gender void, non-binary erasure, and moving into how those strict roles are actually quite harmful to people, and some of the expectations that end up getting placed on women in paganism, and how tarot is actually used to kind of reinforce that. So that's our last class, and once we start going over individual cards, we'll go into more about how cards like Temperance, cards like the Empress, are used to really reinforce those ideas that, like, all women are supposed to be mothers, and all women are supposed to be these creative, emotional support lamps with helpful advice written on them. But right now we're going to go ahead and pick up with the problem of the expectation of emotional labor. One of the things that I've seen reinforced with the ideas of gender essentialism in the pagan community using tarot is that idea of emotional labor, where people are told that what the cards mean over and over again is you should pour more of your support, more of your heart, more of your caring, more of that creative, caring spirit that all women are assumed to have into a relationship that is actually toxic, or into an environment where you've already poured enough. So we're going to talk about what emotional labor is and how gender essentialism enforces it. One of the ideas in gender essentialism, as we covered last week, is that women are naturally better at understanding emotions than men. Starting with the, okay, how are we defining women? Are you including female-presenting people? Are you including trans women? In which case, this is not a biological thing. This has nothing to do with possessing a uterus or a vagina. This is a, you think that women just are this way. If it is a uterus or vagina-centered thing, and then so trans men or male presenting or gender fluid and non-binary people who identify as male sometimes could still be possessing of that naturally more emotional, more understanding attitudes, I'm going to refer you back to what we covered last class, that our brains aren't actually different. There have been multiple studies done into the structure of cis female and cis male brains, and they can't tell them apart. But my issue here is like, okay, so women are supposed to just naturally be better at understanding emotions. And whenever I start going like, okay, well, what do you mean by women? It generally ends up being like, oh, well, people who are identified female as birth. Okay. Why? There's nothing wrong, or not wrong, well, there's nothing wrong with our brains, but there's nothing different, naturally different with our brains, so where is this coming from? So either the assumption, I'm going to sum up, is that it has something to do with our lady parts or our lady brains, and both are bullshit. And basically, no, there is no difference between our brain, which means it's social. And then people start going like, yeah, well, it's a positive thing. No, it isn't. It's not positive to treat male-presenting people and male-identifying people as if they can't understand their own emotions. That's actually incredibly unhealthy and incredibly restrictive. And I don't know if you've noticed, but most of the shooters recently have had a couple things in common. They're white, they're male-identifying and presenting, they come from affluent, privileged areas, and they are lashing out in this entitlement and this violence partially because nobody has ever expected them to deal with their own fucking emotions. Their emotions are everybody else's problem. oh, if they feel excluded, if they feel like they're not getting what they deserve, that's not something they have to work through. No, that's something everybody else has to pay for. Also, like, I don't know if you know this, but male-identifying people are a suicide risk. Like a huge suicide risk. And one of the reasons for this is because... Okay. And one of the reasons for this is that male-identifying people are not encouraged to explore their own emotions in a healthy fashion. You ever notice also how dependent on a female sexual or romantic partner male-identifying people become? One of the reasons for this is because they're not taught to explore their own emotions and to seek emotional support from healthy friendships. No, it must come from a sexual and romantic partner. In fact, that's the only socially acceptable source of any kind of emotional support and emotional exploration, which ends up making them have really shitty ideas of what friendship is. If you try and provide a male-identifying person with the same kind of friendship that you would provide your female-identifying friends with, you know what they think you're offering them? Sex. And one of the reasons why they do is they don't have that in their heads as friendship. They have that in their heads as, this person is my sexual and romantic partner.
Hi, guys!
Yes, I talk openly about these things with my 9-year-old, and if anyone wants to be like, oh, how could you? They have to grow up in this world.
If we're getting any comments about that,
that was a great face. Thank you for not leaving me hanging. But seriously, those are just some of the issues that I could spend an entire class unpacking. But a big issue is how often I've seen divination and tarot readings used to reinforce the idea that female-identifying people are always supposed to love unconditionally and always, always forgive. There is no encouragement in most tarot readings that I've witnessed at tarot festivals, at Renaissance fairs, at psychic festivals and stuff, for a female-identifying person to be encouraged to go like, you know what? I don't owe people shit. I don't owe them this free emotional labor. I am not their psychologist. I am not their psychiatrist. I am not their therapist. I am not their counselor. I literally work here. Or I'm in this relationship that, hey, there's 2 of us, or more of us, because let's not be heteronormative and monosexual about this class. So what you see is that women are encouraged, and by women I am including trans women, but we'll say female-identifying. Female-identifying people are encouraged not only to be the person who cooks, who cleans, who raises the children, but they're encouraged to carry other people's discomfort, anger, grief, help them recognize their pain, help them heal. And one of the phrases I keep hearing repeated around tarot and in the pagan community in general is, all women are healers. No, they're not, and they shouldn't have to be. It is not the responsibility of female-identifying people to carry all the emotional burdens of the world, to help everyone else sort through their shit. People need to learn to do that as individuals without depending on those around them, just because society has said that those people are in that very confining and very exhausting role. One of the expectations that are placed on women who are being told, female-identifying people, who are being told that they are supposed to be healers, they're supposed to be represented by the chalice, they're supposed to be represented by the water element, they're supposed to be these deep emotional wells of healing and support, is that they're never encouraged to just be like, this is exhausting. I'm gonna go do some self-care and like come back at this when I feel like I'm able to handle it. No, they're told that that's some kind of a failure on their spiritual journey. And if they're like, you know what, I'm just not that kind of person at all. I have about the emotional maturity and depth of a block of wood. And I don't really feel like the chalice, and I don't really feel like the empress, and I don't really feel like the goddess. I just feel like a person who's trying to have my own shit together and not have to handle everybody else's. They're told that they are denying their own nature, denying their own divinity, denying the goddess inside of them, and that somehow they're letting down the entire world. And I mean, don't even get me started on the obligation of people with uteruses to create children. Seriously, if you don't want kids, don't have them, okay? Because they will vomit on you, they will bleed on you, they will poop on you, they will pee on you, they will probably bite you at some point. And if you don't want to deal with that, don't. Well, you did. You were itty bitty at the time, so...
Don't assume every child to be like that.
Having worked as a nursery caretaker from the age of 11 to 18, most kids will vomit on you at some point or another. There's a lot of bodily effluvia involved. And if you are not prepared for the bodily effluvia, don't. One thing I want to touch on before we actually leave the dangers of emotional labor, which I forgot to bring up, you know this also happens in workplaces, that female-presenting people, female-identifying people in workplaces are expected to do a huge amount of emotional labor for their coworkers, and, like, still get their work done. I want to touch on the fact that, and I'm saying this as, like, pasty as I am, this is harder for people of color. Without me speaking over the community or putting my words in their mouth, there have been a lot of studies into the expectations placed on Black women in their communities to be nurses, to be therapists, to be the supporting figure in a community that is constantly threatened by violence from the outside, where there are legal forces that come in and basically take our Black male citizens and put them into slavery for Walmart and Victoria's Secret. And the people left to patch up the community over and over and over again are Black women. And you see this from teachers, where teachers expect Black women to be the therapists of their neighborhood, the healers of their neighborhood, and provide zero social support for these services that they're expected to. And, you know, we need to stop treating Black female-identifying people as societal band-aids. So one of the things that really, really pissed me off recently is there was some asshole trying to get elected, and I kept seeing all over Facebook, Black women saved us, Black women saved us. That is not their job. They saved themselves. Okay, the person that were most at risk in that situation was them, and this attitude that we treat them like they're supposed to be our societal band-aids, that's really icky. So again, I don't want to go on and on and on because I'll feel like I'm taking the mic from someone about a situation that affects them far more than I am affected. Like, I'm sitting here in a position of privilege, so anyway. The dangers of sex positivity in our divination and our witchcraft in our pagan community. Theoretically, the gender essentialism that turns into sex positivity would be a really healthy thing. Theoretically, it would end up allowing people to explore their sexual identification, their sexual orientation, without criticism or the burden of other people's expectations or judgment. So how this should look is that if you went, I'm ace, everyone around you went, cool. Or if you said, I'm poly, everybody around you would go, cool. Or if you said, I'm a lesbian, or I'm gay, or you know what, I've tried a couple different boxes and none of them really fit, so I'm still figuring out what I am, everyone would say, cool. Or they'd say, you know, like, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, none of my business. That's not what ends up happening. Female-identifying people are super, super pressured to engage in sexual activity in very limited, very controlled ways. Let's touch on the Lover's card for a moment. I have attended so many different readings where the Lover's card has been interpreted as simply a sexual relationship between one cisgendered male person and one cisgendered female person. And there's a tendency to interpret a card that is literally about a sexual relationship as a romantic relationship. That's the Two of Cups, by the way. But I see over and over and over again this attitude that sex must be between one male-bodied person and one female-bodied person, with that body being interpreted in a very transphobic way, an intersex-phobic way, and two, that any sexual relationship between a cisgender male and a cisgender female is romantic and should be romantic. that card gets interpreted as fiance, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, and it's not. It just represents passionate and sometimes sexual relationships between persons. You don't know, based on when you're doing a tarot reading, whether someone is poly. You don't know whether they are asexual. You don't know what their negotiation is, whether they're in an open relationship, whether they're in a relationship with someone who is non-gendered. This assumption that it must mean one very narrow interpretation of a passionate or sexual relationship is not only just making it so that some people don't go get tarot readings because they feel like it's not going to be accurate to them, it's never going to represent the circumstances of their lives, but it's encouraging some really puritanical sexual ideas that are really prevalent in the pagan community. And honestly, I blame Gerald Gardner, but everyone bears a responsibility to evolve over time. So let's start with what we went over in one of our very first classes on this topic. Either the explanation for how things are structured now is, but ancient cultures did it this way. Or the explanation for what we do now is, but this is what works for us now. Okay? If we're going, but ancient cultures did it this way, I hate to break it to you, but our idea of, I have no idea, ask Diana. Our ideas of sexual and romantic relationships are not based on what ancient cultures did. There are multitudes of ancient cultures that recognized 5, 6, 7 genders. There are multiple ancient cultures that permitted polyamory. Hey, I hate to break it to you, but some of them still exist because white ideas of what is and is not okay do not define indigenous cultures. Do not define First Nations cultures. So if you take a minute to step out of your box and look around the world, you're going to find, yes, you may. You're going to find relationships that just do not fit that. And they date back to the birth of civilization in Africa, by the way. It's not what we think it is just because we grew up in America. It's not. Our ideas of what is normal in a sexual relationship do not apply to everyone. So if you're using the, but ancient cultures, nope. You failed. Go read an anthropology book. Or if you're doing, but this is what works for us now, no. Obviously it doesn't. There are trans people in our communities. There are polyamorous people in our communities. There are people who only have sexual relations when it is in the context of BDSM or a kink relationship. And there are people who only have relationships with their lesbian life partner. We have to take away that lens that we're looking at things through. Because one thing, starting off with just erasure sucks. Stop doing that to people. But female identifying people are being really, really pressured to have sexual congress in really specific ways that are unhealthy and ignore enthusiastic ongoing consent. And let's talk about what I mean by enthusiastic ongoing consent. If you are just starting out on your spiritual journey, and let's say you're 18 and you join a coven and your coven has a 35-year-old high priest. And that 35-year-old high priest says, in order to do your initiation ceremony, you have to have sex with me. And everyone in the community thinks that that's fine. That's normal. That's expected. And that if you have a problem with it, that means something is wrong with you. That means some part of your spiritual journey is broken. That means that some part of your embracing of your divine femininity is broken. Some part of you loving yourself is broken. If they exert enough pressure on you to get you to say yes, that is not consent. They can say over and over again that it was not, but consent is freely given. It is absent from pressure. It is absent from the exerted opinions of the others around you. It is absent from the idea that maybe you won't be welcome to continue your spiritual journey with these people if you don't get with the program. And I don't know if you know this, but our spirituality, whether you identify as heathen, pagan, Kemetic, basically anything non-Abrahamic, is not actually super welcome and public right now. If someone is living in the Bible Belt and they manage to find one coven, that may be the only coven. So if they don't feel welcome in the Abrahamic church, and that's the only place for them to go, then they may not leave. So before you go like, well, I would just find another coven. What if you live in Kentucky? Like, that's not an option for everyone. Not everyone lives in Vegas where I can name 15. And even then, some of the ones I can name in Vegas engage in exactly that kind of predatory, pressury behavior. So the danger with the sex positivity and the automatic assumption that female identifying people must step into sexualized roles exist in everything from thelema to sex magic. I have had people tell me that I can't practice thelema because I'm asexual. I have had people tell me that you can't practice sex magic without having sex with another partner. Which is wrong, by the way. In case you were watching this, you need to go back and watch my sexual education videos because no, that's wrong. Anyway. Sex-positive witchcraft, which is hugely prevalent in tarot readings, ends up being a repackaging of misogynistic impositions on female-identifying bodies, sexualities, and gender performance, rather than eradicating the sexist oppression of all women, which you would think would be happening in paganism, in that by all women we would be including trans women. Sex-positive witchcraft puts pressure on maidens to remain pure, while often being slavered over by basically anyone who's waiting for them to turn 18, which, by the way, just because it's legal doesn't make it right. Where was I? Mothers to be sexually available to higher ranking members of covens or to take on these really split, polarized roles of high priest and high priestess.
Wiley's in here.
Hi, Wiley.
By the way, Wiley is a dog.
And crones to be sexless and step aside for a younger generation. I don't know if you know this, but age doesn't actually have a whole heck of a lot to do with sexual appetites, and that just because somebody doesn't look like your porn stars doesn't mean that they're not sexually active. Like, that's a fucked up assumption, and y'all need to rethink aging in America, just in general. And this ideology erases the racial, cultural, and personal influence that shape each female-identifying person's sexual preferences, and places a whole new level of complication onto the chokehold that society keeps on female-identifying sexual choices. Because now, you get these attitudes where a female-identifying person will be shunned or denied their right to learn certain magics because they didn't follow the rules, because they didn't abide by a set of strictures placed upon them that they didn't agree to and that people have been telling them about since birth. Where was I? Yeah. I can go on about dangers of sex positivity. Literally, I could do a whole class on it. One of the issues that gets to me with sex positivity is everyone has sort of this idea of sex positivity, and then they'll be like, except for that, because that's not okay. Basically, anything between one or more fully consenting persons is none of my business, okay? So I don't care if you're having a 30-plus member orgy in a park somewhere, as long as you're not... And again, like, fully consenting people. You can't do it where children may stumble upon it, okay? I don't care if you never want another person to touch you sexually. That's sex positivity. But we start doing this thing where it's like, except for sex workers. Not them. That's wrong. No. Except for people who don't want to have sex at all. No. Well, except for people who engage in that kind of sex, because I personally find it icky. As long as they're not hurting anybody, it's none of your business. And by not hurting any people, let me clarify, I don't mean a kink style fully negotiated causing of pain. That's none of your business. There are ways to hurt people that cause lifelong trauma that are not okay, and they violate consent. I'm not talking about we like to break out the whip in the bedroom. Okay? That's none of your business. By always interpreting the wands and the lovers a certain way, you are taking this really limited set of sexual ideas and smacking it right down in the middle of someone's exploration of their own sexuality. And we have to stop. It's actively harmful. All right, moving right along. Transgender women aren't viewed as really women, regardless of whether you're talking about in a tarot reading, which we will be, as this class goes on, going more and more into actual interpretations of the cards. But we're starting off with the harmfulness of just gender essentialism and LGBTQIA erasure in general in the pagan community. When the idea is that women are born as goddesses and as embodiments of the female divine, you run into this concept that someone who chooses to become a woman is first eschewing what the divine wanted them to be at birth, and second, trying to become an embodiment of the sacred feminine without the ability to do so. We already went into why I don't think the idea that we're all goddesses is actually a good thing. And how limiting it is on the expectations placed on people. But let's talk about the fact that trans women are treated in the pagan community as taking the place of a real woman, taking a real woman's position of power and mimicking her sacred femininity, but still really being a man. No, there's so much wrong with that. Let's start with trans people are biologically the gender that they identify with. They are. There is literally something in their genetics that makes them trans. We proved this year, but really all of the studies into it just proved what trans people have been saying forever. It also displays just an incredibly poor understanding of gender, as it assumes that genital formation at birth is the sole defining criteria that determines gender. It's not. That has been proven false by, like, the medical community, the biological community, the mental health community, and your 6th grade understanding of biology does not define reality. This exclusion of trans women is made very, very obvious in certain Dianic covens. At PantheaCon in San Francisco in mid-February 2011, when the Come As You Are coven's Amazon priestess tribe, part of the traditional Dianic Wicca, founded by Z Budapest, held a public ritual in celebration of the goddess Lilith, they turned away anyone from the door who was male, which included anyone who was female but was identified at birth as being male. The conference does allow those holding rituals to choose to advertise their rituals as targeted at and limited to certain groups, but in this case the organizers decided to institute a door policy which only allowed for women born as women. It is my current understanding that trans women identified and disqualified themselves from attending the ritual when they became aware of the door policy. Can we talk about that after I'm done teaching class?
Oh, come on.
Thank you. Certainly the Dianic Coven says that none attended, though without a DNA test for all participants, there's no way the Dianic Coven knows for sure that no trans women remained present. That's... The idea that you can clock a trans person is not only transphobic, like, I keep having people on the Interfaith Council tell me they've never met a trans person, and I'm like, you think you haven't. Let's talk about your assumption that you will automatically know what someone identifies as. Let's talk about your assumption that, like, everyone is really visibly gay or really visibly trans, or... I hate the term gaydar, by the way. I hate it. I hate it so much because it's basically means like, oh, I can recognize stereotypes from a block away. Good for you. Anyway, the aforementioned Z Budapest made very clear her position on trans women when she stated, "This struggle has been going on since the women's mysteries first appeared. These individuals selfishly never think about the following. If women allow men to be incorporated into Dianic mysteries, what will women own on their own? Nothing. Again, transies who attack us only care about themselves." We women need our own culture, our own resourcing, our own traditions. You can tell these are men. They don't care if women lose the only tradition reclaimed after much research and practice, the Dianic tradition. Men simply want in. It's their will. How dare us women not let them in and get away the only spiritual home we have. Men want to worship the goddess. Why not put in the work and create your own trads? The Order of Attis, for example, dormant since the 4th century, used to be for transgendered persons. Also the castrata, men who castrated themselves to be more like the goddess. Why are we the only tradition they want? Go Gardnerian, go Druid, go eclectic. Filled with women and men, they would fit fine. But if you claim to be one of us, you have to have sometime in your life a womb, and ovaries, and moonbleed, and not die. Women are born, not made by men on operating tables. I am quoting her word for word. There's a Dianic coven here in Las Vegas. Also, like, there was so much in there toxic towards men, and I get that we live in a patriarchal society where men are born with certain privileges. They're also born with a huge amount of really limited assumptions put on them. We just talked about how they're told that they don't get to have emotions. Like, how many times have you seen a man be told he can't like the color pink? Or that he can't get a hug from his best friend because that makes him gay, or that he can't buy, like, lotion because that makes him effeminate, or that he can't cry or break down or seek help, or, like, let's talk about the assumption that cisgendered men can't be raped. It's not fun for anyone, okay? I get that there's a lot of damage that male-identifying and cisgendered men are doing to women in a very sexist, misogynistic, male-preferring society. But it's hurting them too, okay? And you can't address what's happening to one group of our culture and not address what's happening to them. And trans women are not men who are masquerading in order to gain access to women-only spaces. They're women trying to go to where they belong. The entire attitude and the public exhibition of it denies trans women equal treatment in their gender. It questions the validity of their self-assignment and raises questions about the participation of women with other medical issues, such as women who are infertile or postmenopausal or who have had a hysterectomy. If fertility and menstruation are the measurement of a woman, they've just kicked out a fair portion of the female, feminine, and femme genders and gender-presenting and gender-identifying persons. This is particularly strange with Dianic covens coming out of such a feminist background and so grounded in women insisting on inclusion in society on their terms. Even when setting aside issues such as involuntary outing, which has incredible dangers associated with it, especially in areas where trans panic is considered a legal defense for assault or murder. I'm not kidding, there are states where it is legal to kill a trans person for hitting on you because you panicked. Yeah. A coven that insists that women are women, that women are what women say they are and have the power they say they have should not be demanding that a woman self-identify that she's not a woman in order to come to one of their rituals. It's a really inconsistent position. This exclusion further marginalizes trans women who are already denied equal treatment the entire world over, who are 4 times more likely than the general population to report living in extreme poverty, and of whom 80% report experiencing harassment at school when they were young. It also silences voices that speak of unique experiences, which are invaluable to our perspectives on womanhood and femininity. This is strangely antithetical to the goals of a supposedly feminist pagan organization. Unfortunately, these ideas are not limited to Dianic covens. My partner and I at Havencraft host a support circle for pagans who have endured abuse at the hands of their teachers or other high-ranking members of the spiritual community. And we had a really long and very exhausting conversation with a woman who wanted us to forbid men and trans women from participating in our support circles. She claimed that a person possessing a penis, again, no acknowledgement that a woman might be post-operation or that the formation of a woman's genitalia in no way determines her gender, was some way, like, actively harmful. That just by possessing a penis, they would make everyone else uncomfortable. Anyway, I see this in tarot readings with these really, really gendered assumptions. Like, I've had people say, like, the chalice represents the vagina and the womb, so the suit of chalices as always women, and it's like, I don't get it. You're marching with signs saying we are not our genitalia, and then turning around and telling trans women they're not welcome. And you're saying, like, stop defining us by our genitals, and then turning around and saying that women are not welcome because they happen to have a different genital formation. And when it comes to tarot interpretation, if you're reading for someone, let's say that they are male identifying, male presenting, or cisgendered man, and you're pulling the chalices and you go, oh, well, this is women. Chalices are always women. Then, like, what if it's about his life? But you're saying, oh, you don't have a vagina, so this card can't be about you? Ugh. The bullshit of the gender binary. That is really distracting. I hope that you can still hear me. I'm trying to speak up. I'm naturally kind of soft-voiced, so we'll see how I can do. All right. To examine some of the dangerous ideas that we find in paganism, in pagan spirituality, in tarot reading relating to gender, we first have to look at the fact that our idea of the divine is heavily tied into procreation. The idea of the receptive and creative feminine and the projective and assertive masculine. The Western mystery traditions use procreation as a metaphor for all creation, and use the biological roles of the genders as metaphors for the two halves of the divine. One huge problem with this is that there are more than two genders. Another big problem on a metaphorical level is that you're assuming that creation, the act of making something from nothing, is tied to procreation, the making of something from something. These are not analogous. On a purely metaphorical level, this fails. Babies are not made from nothing. They are made from something. This is not the birth of creation where there was nothingness, which became somethingness. That is a much larger concept than the idea of procreation. Also, it's really, really dangerous for us as a culture to start saying that procreation is an act of instant creation of life. I want to talk just for a second, just so you all know, abortion's in the Bible, and not as forbidding abortion. In the Bible is a section where it details how to go to your priest and request one, because there were certain circumstances under which you could, according to the Hebrew and Christian traditions. The idea that life begins at conception is actually relatively recent in most cultures. When there was just a huge amount of death, and we as cultures were most often not succeeding every time we attempted to procreate. Most cultures recognized life beginning at birth, or even 3 or 4 days after birth upon baptism and naming. But if we're talking that, like, creation is the moment of conception, there's a lot of baggage to that I don't agree with, personally. Also, like, the idea that the supreme power of magic, indeed of all the universe, exists solely in creation, as associated with procreation, is deeply flawed. Not only does it alienate the asexual people and the people who cannot sexually reproduce, it denies the shades of creation itself. Creation itself is defined as all that is. That includes asexual reproduction. And before somebody gets on here and is like, ha ha ha, asexuals reproduce asexual. No, that's not what I mean. I'm talking about, like, slime molds that reproduce asexually. And I'm gonna, like, I want to buy you a better biology textbook. Parthenogenesis, androgenesis, hermaphroditic species, multigendered species, sex-changing species, non-gendered species, etc. Like, trees don't do that. Did you know that there are trees that reproduce by putting their roots out and just making another tree? And you as a pagan are going to be like, oh no, life and creation is defined as procreation. You just limited yourself so that trees aren't included in your idea of creation. Like, no. Sorry, I keep getting distracted. The argument against this point is often that we are discussing human powers of creation. Never mind that one of the arguments against trans persons participating in magic is that they eschew the plan of the divine for their flesh. Okay, fine, but humans have more than two genders, and reproduction is not as simple as insert tab A into tab B. Among humans, binary gender is an artifact of the desire for easy classifications. Violations of this simple binary are plentiful. XXX, XXY, and XYYY genotypes and genitalia that does not present as fully male or fully female appear in 1 out of 100 individuals. You are more likely to be intersex than you are to be naturally redheaded. Yeah. You are more likely to be intersex than to have green eyes. That's how common it is. The number used to be quoted as 1 in 2,500 or 1 in 1,000, varying numbers in the thousands. It turns out that these were incredibly conservative numbers, derived from ancient studies of genitalia presentation, not taking into account the fact that physicians sometimes arbitrarily perform gender assignment surgery, which is genital mutilation, by the way, at birth, or assign gender before checking for any signs that the gender didn't fit. DNA tests reveal that intersex is far, far more common than we have been led to believe. So when the pagan community demands that all persons be either fully male or fully female, setting aside some of the issues with their definitions of either of these, they're erasing a pretty big chunk of the human spectrum. Under the definition Dianics use, people who are not male or female, but rather something outside of or in between or moving back and forth between the two, are simply not welcome. But sometimes the exclusion is more subtle, but not less damaging. When all women are goddesses and all men are gods, where does that leave the intersex persons, or the gender non-conforming persons, or the non-gendered persons? When pagans stand naked beneath the sky and call for all women to shout, "I am the goddess," or in all men to shout, "I am the god," what is an intersex or non-binary person supposed to shout? Yeah, America, that's what they're supposed to shout. And let's talk for a second about gods and goddesses. I'm just gonna rattle off 2, because I could do this for a while. Let's talk about Ganesha Ganesh. Do you know why people say it that way? They say Ganesha Ganesh or Ganesh Ganesha. It's because Ganesh or Ganesha is a gender fluid deity. Sometimes Ganesha identifies as female, sometimes Ganesh identifies as male, and sometimes Ganesh is neither or in between. You ever heard the term Ashira Asherat or Ashirat or Ashira? It comes from really, really ancient Hebrew culture before the Iron Age. Yahweh, who was at the time called El, who was the head of the hosts of the Elohim, which were the armies of heaven, had a consort. That consort was the ocean itself. It was the sea. And the sea could not be defined as being one gender or another. That was too limiting for something as massive and powerful as the ocean. Also, the Canaanite region had some interesting ideas about when the sea recedes, it is one, and when it moves forward, it's a different one. So Ashira Asherat, the consort of El, who became Yahweh, was a gender-fluid deity, sometimes male and sometimes female. But whenever I go to one of these pagan events where they mention that Yahweh has a consort, they always say Ashira, and they never say Asherat. And the thing is, if you did Wikipedia research, then you would be able to know that Ashira is not always Ashira. There's an active stifling of the information. How many yoga people do you know walk around with like scarves on their backs of Ganesha Ganesh? A lot? Like, it's a pretty popular thing. I can walk into like any yoga or Reiki center in town and buy a yoga mat with Ganesha Ganesh on it, buy a scarf with Ganesha Ganesh, buy a wall hanging with Ganesha Ganesh, and yet they never want to talk about the fact that Ganesha Ganesh is a gender fluid deity. They also don't want to actually play Hindu music, which is weird. Because like yoga comes from a culture. There's like chants and music that goes with the practice of yoga. It is not an exercise. It is a religion and spiritual path. But okay. Anyway, the problem for male identifying people. Female identifying people aren't the only people being hurt by the gender essentialism and paganism. Men are too, both cisgendered men and trans men. At one point, I taught the High Priestess of a coven. Her coven required that only women be in positions of power. When I asked whether or not a male-bodied person could ever access the feminine divine, I was scolded and lectured on and off through emails with this coven over a period of a year. A year! Because I believe that what gender you are does not determine whether or not you could access what gets termed the feminine divine or the masculine divine. I hate those terms, by the way. We already talked about how the binary is bullshit, but let's, one of the things that bugs me about this is you can't say the divine is in everyone, and then say, but only in one form. Like, anyone born with a vagina has the feminine divine, and anyone born with a penis has the masculine divine. Really? Like, I'm sorry, your ideas don't limit the universe. That's not how that works. And it can create people, and does create people, in a wondrous spectrum of diversity. And you can stomp around and be like, nope, 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 nope. Doesn't change anything. Trans people will still be out there. Like, men who paint their nails and wear lipstick will still be out there. Like, you can go, no, 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 I refuse, and all it does is make me feel like you and Trump would get along really well. Like, it doesn't change the world. It just makes you ignorant. Anyway. When all women are goddesses, then all men must be gods, right? Not always. Male-identifying people are sometimes made to feel really, really unwelcome in female-dominated magical environments, because many female-identifying people move to paganism to escape the really patriarchal attitudes of other mainstream religions. They will often respond with hostility to male-identifying people entering into that environment. Male-identifying people are sometimes seen as trying to take over a female-identifying person's spot, which, don't get me wrong, I've encountered my fair share of mansplaining from male-identifying pagans. Like, I've been there when the male-identifying pagans are like, no, 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 I know this because I read this one book once. And it's like, you do know that I, like, have spent my entire life studying this. Right? No, learned multiple languages in order to do it. Yeah, okay. But when male-identifying people come to paganism and the craft, they should be met with the same open opportunities as anybody else, rather than rejected because of their gender presentation or their genitalia. Although I do recognize the right for female-identifying people to request male-identifying people not be present for, like, sky-clad rituals or births, I don't see why male-identifying people are flat-out made to feel unwelcome or inferior in certain pagan environments. What I do see is, I see a lot of setting aside of toxic masculinity for idealized masculinity, which isn't actually better. And I want to talk to you guys for just a second about idealization that is objectification, because it's a concept that I feel like is missing from a lot of discussions. I'm seeing it right now with Black Panther in theaters, where people who would never support the actual Black Panthers, or the Black Lives Matter movement, or, you know, recognize that there's this violence and oppression towards this entire community for something as stupid as their ancestors lived closer to the equator. Someone who would lock their door if a black man walked by are talking about how gorgeous the Black Panther actors are. And they're not doing it in a, wow, you know what, like, I was raised to think that the white imperialist standard of beauty was the only thing that could be beautiful, and now my eyes are open. No, they're doing it in a fetishizing and objectifying fashion. So I attended, recently, a event that was supposed to raise money for people who were survivors of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, sexual misconduct, and domestic violence. And at it, this guy starts reading off these pink note cards, because everything's pink. There was so much wrong with this. They had a white woman get on stage and read a Maya Angelou poem about the experiences of being, you know, a black woman in the South and the sexual violence directed at her for being a black woman in the South. She was white and reading off pink note cards, and it was so wrong. Anyway, so this guy starts starts on this talk about how male people, and they were not doing male identifying or clarifying that this included trans men or was specifically those who identified as male or were designated at birth as male. They were just saying men. Men rape women because they want to return to the vagina. They came from the sacred vagina, which is a really bad misunderstanding of Tantra and yoga and yoni and kundalini and all of it. It's a terrible misunderstanding. It's a very white misunderstanding, but we'll talk about cultural imperialism another day. He was talking about the reason why they rape them is because they want to return to the vagina. Let's talk about how rape isn't always penis and vaginal rape, and it goes the other way too, but that's a topic for another time. And as he was talking, he was saying, like, men will only truly be able to return to the divine when they appreciate women for what they really are. Soft, sweet, sensual mothers and daughters and sisters who are so vulnerable and who are healers, and you don't get to return to the divine via the divine vagina until you appreciate the softness and sweetness of women. Ew! Ew! One, female identified at birth people can rape male identified at birth people. Like, just so you know, that happens. 2, rape is not always vaginal. And 3, stop saying that you shouldn't rape people because they might be something important to a man. It's not because we're your sisters and your daughters. It's because it's wrong. And 4, why are we defining women as, like, soft, sweet, sensual vagina havers? 5, let's stop assuming that the reason why people rape others is because of some spiritual journey they're trying to have, and acknowledge that it's oppression and violence. It's not sexual, and it's certainly not part of their spiritual seeking. It's them trying to hurt someone else. And there was so much wrong.
It's basically everything about that.
Right, I kept hearing the Luke Skywalker thing, the amazing. Every word of that sentence was wrong. That's fetishization. That is objectification. That is saying, I should not hurt this person because I fetishize an idea of what they are. I should not hurt someone because they are an object of import to me. Like, have you ever met one of those white men who specifically dates Asian women because they think they're submissive?
Oh, there's so many like that.
Yep, that's objectification. That's fetishizing. And we do this the other way in paganism. We fetishize a certain idea of what it means to be male presenting. We do it to female identifying people too, but, like, outside of paganism, you come across this idea of what a male identifying person is or is not. They're supposedly more aggressive. They're more likely to be angry. They're more likely to be sexually promiscuous. They're more likely to be unable to resist their sexual impulses. They're not supposed to like pink or hug a male friend too long or be friends with a woman without wanting to have sex with her. They're not supposed to bathe too often, which is gross. Like, they're not supposed to wash their hands too often, which is gross. And this idea, by the way, that people with penises always want sex is really, really harmful. It's A, excusing all manner of sexual misconduct, and B, erasing any person possessing a penis who's asexual or demisexual. Like, there's so much to unpack here. So much impactful to unpack. There we go. When social constructions of femininity in paganism demand that a woman be accommodating, kind, giving, loving, and emotionally available, and some unattainable balance of virginal and fuckable, social constructions of masculinity in paganism demand that men want to take advantage of that all the time. That's the definition of idealized masculinity in paganism, and that's what people say the wand cards are. That's what people say the emperor is.
This weird protector,
provider, hunter, aggressor. It's this all women are goddesses, so men should protect them and provide for them, which is also disempowering for female identified people. Like, I can protect and provide for myself. And like, what about gay men? Who are they protecting and providing for? Are we gonna start asking gay people which one's the woman? Like, I know I've been there when that happens, but neither is the woman. That's the point.
Right. It is internally consistent. That doesn't make it correct.
The influence of sex positivity on the movement ends up creating this super idealized god figure who is supposed to always be sexual. Never mind his actual sexual preferences, or if people have a healthy sexual attraction to each other. I've actually been there when a high priest was told that he was going to have to step down from his coven because he had broken up with the high priestess. And if they were not like a sexually mating pair, then they could no longer be the spiritual leaders of this coven. Yeah, like, just so you know, everything I wrote about here is something I personally witnessed. Like, I can sit here and give examples, but there's also this supposition, and does this get into some gross cultural ideas, that our male-identifying people in paganism will be attracted to the younger female-identifying and female-presenting members of covens, and that this is A, natural, and B, to be encouraged. Like, it's healthy and natural. And no, it isn't. And if I have one more asshole from some temple or grove tell me it's perfectly natural for him in his 40s to be sexually attracted to her in her teens, I hate to break it to you, but the explanation I keep being given is that this was normal in medieval times. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. That's horribly historically inaccurate. Most marriages in medieval times were between people who were over the age of 18 and relatively equal in age. So we're talking people who were like 18, 19, 20, marrying people who were 18, 19, 20. All of those marriages that people like to cite, where people were 14, were actually betrothal contracts, and the persons were not permitted to have sexual contact with each other until both were fully of age. And just for the record, people actually menstruated later in life then than they do now. And so when it's like, oh, well, she was not considered of age until she was menstruating, that was 16, 17, not 11 or 12. So, like, every excuse I've seen that pedophilia is natural, it's not natural in the bonobos, and they are our closest living relatives. It's not natural there, and it's not natural here, and no, it was not common in the medieval era. And even if it was, it's wrong.
Even if it was, so was the bubonic plague.
Right, so was the bubonic plague, so was, hanging witches, so was burning heretics, so was, like, just because something was done, like we used to make the Semitic population wander around in special hats. It didn't make it right. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now. But really, if you actually examine marriage records at the time, and if you really look into the culture, then you find that people who married children were viewed as gross, disgusting people who were violating the power that they had over someone, just like they are now. Also, like, there ends up being this competition between male-identifying people in the pagan community of how many female-identifying people they can sleep with. And it ends up becoming this game of like, well, I slept with all the nubile young people at the ritual. Ew, ew, ew. And if I had the power, I'd bring you up on rape charges. I don't, because our culture is fucked up, and you need the proof that you need to bring to bear against someone is ridiculous. Yeah, anytime somebody wants to talk to me about false convictions, like, yeah, let's go. Let me walk you through the burden of proof that's necessary. Anyway, there is a huge amount of power imbalances created by this strict binary, strict gender essentialism, and it ends up influencing every aspect of pagan culture, from healers to our clergy counselors to our ritual construction. How many rituals have you been into where one person called down the god and one person called down the goddess? Like, it's... It's everywhere. We're gonna pick up next time moving into how this actually works with divination. How a card gets interpreted in like half the books I have on the shelf. And I'll just start with the first card. Let's talk about the Fool for like 20 seconds. Do you know how often I've been told that the Fool represents a young man at the start of his journey? That's literally in the Rider-Waite deck. Like in the book that comes with the deck, it's a young man starting his journey. And that influences how these cards get interpreted. Interpreted? I swear I had coffee today. I had a lot of coffee today. Maybe I had too much. That's just kind of the beginning of this. But I'm going to go card by card. And we're going to strip away the gender essentialism, and we're going to strip away the LGBTQIA phobia, and say this is how to interpret the card without it. So that's the goal anyway.